Welcome to the Dunamis EQ podcast, where we talk to leaders who lead with great emotional intelligence. And we're all here to learn, we're all here to grow. So buckle up. We've got Mairead in the studio today. Mairead, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me on.
You're very welcome. Mairead and I were grads back in the day at Sky. I think I was a year ahead of you. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. You were the year group we looked up to, literally and figuratively.
Yeah. And you guys were like the cooler version of us because you were that little bit younger. You knew what was going on and we didn't. So Mairead and I have had a good number of years of knowing each other. And Mairead is now at Bloom and Wild, the florist. That's the right term, isn't it? Florist now.
Yep.
Yes. So yeah, welcome to the show. And why don't you tell the guys a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, nice. Thanks, Tully. Yes, so I am Mairead, and yeah, as Tully mentioned, I've been at Bloom Wild. I'm now VP of Analytics and BI for the last 7.5 years. Wow. Feels like 5 minutes. And before that, I was at a company called dunnhumby, who were the original inventors of the Tesco Club Card. And before that, I started off at Sky. I got into analytics completely by accident when I applied for Sky.
Really?
The grad scheme that you did, the business one, had changed.
Yes.
And they were like, "Oh, do you want to do analytics?" And I was like, "I don't know how to code." And they were like, "Yeah, that's fine. We'll teach you."
Doesn't matter. We'll show you.
I know, it doesn't matter. So never imagined there'd be in this industry, but have like.
So what did you think you were going to do?
I think initially thought it was going to be like a business grad scheme, like marketing and like finance, and a bit of this and a bit of that. And which was like, I did business at uni, so it was like, it was like made complete sense, but in some ways being thrown into something that you never thought you would be capable of doing is like quite a cool thing, because then you're like, oh yeah, like you can apply like a lot of other skills and I guess like a different perspective on it, which I find really helpful for the last 10 years.
It's so funny because I would have never thought I was going to go into analytics at all. And for us, it was actually the shortest rotation that we did. We did like 6 weeks in analytics. And I thought I was going to be in sales and marketing. And I loved analytics. I was like, I didn't even know this whole world existed. So it's just like, and here we are like 10 years later.
We are.
still in analytics, still absolutely loving it. So it's just like, it's such a great thing, those grad schemes. I really enjoyed them.
Totally. I think it's like I hope like, I think especially with the economy now, like, you hear like grad schemes getting pulled back a bit more because it is a big investment. And like, I think it's especially for people at that point in their journey when they're trying to figure out who they want to be and where they want to be, like having that opportunity is like invaluable. So hopefully they continue to grow as an area.
Definitely. I hope so. And I think firstly, massive well done. From a grad to VP in 10 years is amazing. It's amazing. So very well done. Very proud of you. You've done an amazing job.
Right back at you. Like.
So what's it like to be a VP?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I think what's it like to be a VP? I think it where to begin? It's like I guess like I've been at Bloom Wild for 8 years, so it's an 8-year journey. And for me, the role of VP encompasses like a few different aspects. So it's like how to be in it like a strong leader for your team, and like how do you make sure that you've got like great people within your team to like do the best they can from the like analytics perspective. Being a VP also provides you a like really awesome opportunity that I never take for granted, which is that you can be involved in like shaping the direction of the business, and you can be involved in thinking about like how do we bring all these different parts of the business together to make like the best decisions. And so to have a seat at that table is amazing, and to be at that table with incredible leaders is also amazing. So yeah, I think it's like if you say it like you're going to be a VP, I'd be like, similar to like being an analyst, I'd be like absolutely terrified. But actually, when you do it, it's like, oh yeah, I am a VP. It's like, but
it must be very surreal.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's for me, I don't think I've changed that much, hopefully, but like it's interesting when you get playback from other people, especially people that you don't know. It's like I feel like people treat you slightly differently if you've never met you, whereas like obviously people that you know are your friends you go to the pub with, and like no one ever I don't even half my friends don't know my job title, I don't know their job titles, but we're all just like great friends. So like it's kind of like almost like decoupling that, I guess the bit is important. It also helps that a lot of the leaders at Bloomwald have stayed for the whole period. So it's not, I guess it's like not an individual success. It's more like all of us have kind of grown on a like similar path. And so we're all having these conversations with each other, like, oh, like, you know, we're now in these important meetings, and they're like, oh yeah. It's kind of like, I don't know, it kind of makes it kind of again makes it less scary. And it's like when you actually break down what you're doing, it's great. It's like an amazing opportunity.
So with Bloom and Wild, how old were they when you started? Because it sounds like you started there quite early and you've all grown really well together. So like, how big was it when you started? How big is it now? Like, what does your area look like?
Yeah, great question. So when I started, I think there were we all fit in a tiny little office. So I think we were around 15 people.
15?
Yeah, and now it's,
wow.
yeah, I know, it was tiny. And now it's, I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's like well over 400, maybe 500. And like we've acquired like other companies in Europe as well. So we've got the Bloom and Wild brand in the UK, but we also own a company called Bloom On in Europe and Bergamot in France. So again, it's like all the growth kind of, I think because it's happened over a number of years, sometimes like when you zoom out, you think, wow, like 15 to so many hundred, but it was like every stand up on Monday, there was like 2 people joining and like 2 people joining. And I think there's like a step change when you acquire other companies, because obviously then you add in like a big group of people. But yeah, all of a sudden, I used to measure the business based on like how many offices how big the office was. So we'd keep moving office every year for like a number of years, often in the same building. But it was like, oh yeah, we keep. And so like I measure like where we were based on like which seat did I sit in at that time. I was like, oh yeah, we were just going into Europe at that point. So it's like a more like visual way for me to think about, like, obviously it's harder now working from home, but like yeah.
That's amazing. And how many people are in the data function or in the analytics function?
Yeah, so we are a team of, I manage like the team of 12. Yeah, so relatively small versus the rest of the business, but like 12, I'm very biased, but 12 awesome team members.
Very powerful, so, small but mighty. It's okay.
Yeah, small but mighty, definitely.
Small but mighty.
Definitely. And like it's great to see because they've like really cemented themselves across the business as like really important thought partners for lots of our big decisions, and like really are involved at the heart of like what marketing are doing, what like, you know, the product teams are doing, and like loads of other areas. So it's great to see, as well as being a leader of that function, it's great to see that the level below me, like my direct reports, have got like they're really strong leaders, and so they've been able to like use that within all these different like pockets. So it's kind of like I like kind of see it overall, but like they're able to like really like focus and make sure we're doing the right things, and especially given that we are a small team.
Well, it's small, but it's like almost the size of the whole company when you join. So it's like it's a very interesting perspective.
Wow, I've never thought about it like that, but that's wow.
I know, right?
Yeah, maybe one day we'll be 500. Who knows?
Who
watch
knows?
this space. Yeah.
Exactly. So what does emotional intelligence mean to you?
So I think there's like a couple of different facets to it. So I think it's like how I as a like leader like bring myself to like situations, and that can be across like a whole host of things, like I guess like the emotional response. I think it's like the empathy. So like how do you understand the perspective of like the person that you're working with? I think there's also a piece which is the other side, which is like where are other people coming from when they come to a conversation, and how can you like work together to reach a common goal? I think it's it's really interesting, I think, especially with working from home. I think a lot of those signals you pick up so easily sat in an office. You pick up the emotion, you pick up people's mood that day, you pick up, I think it's easier to also bring yourself. And so it's like we're now in this situation, which I think a lot of people are, is like how do you translate that into like a completely different space? Like, it's a lot more in Slack and it's a lot more in video call, because I think without that strong communication, like business isn't successful. Like I think that's like a really I think that's like the number one thing you need to get right. So like really being able to understand people, like in that sense, is vital to be a strong leader. I think it's also another like aspect of it is how different people are wired differently, right? So like some people have really strong emotional intelligence EQ, and some people either it's not an area they're particularly strong in, or there is like neurodiversity as well. So it's like how do you create the space that means that you can use emotional intelligence as a leader, but equally like how can you make sure that you give everyone the opportunities, even if they're not quite able to like bring like the same perspective or same level of emotional intelligence to a situation. And so I think that is big, and it's great to see that neurodiversity is like more and more of a focus, and it like has really like illuminated, because I think it's like how can we make sure that all of us like can work together to, like, as I said, reach that common goal.
I think that's a really interesting perspective around the neurodiversity, because I'm not very well versed in what that means, how that works. So if you know a little bit, it would be great for you to explain a little bit about neurodiversity and how do you think that plays into EQ. And bearing in mind, like, no one is claiming that you're an expert, so this is all just opinion, thoughts. Like, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on it, because I'd never really thought about it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's actually I've learned loads on this, and I guess like I'm still trying to learn loads on it. Like we have like a really strong D&I focus like internally, and like as part of that we've got like some great individuals who are really championing this area. And again, as I said, I'm absolutely not the expert. So I think one area where this comes into play, and as I said, I'm definitely not an expert, is around like colleagues or individuals who, for example, are autistic. So like that it can be harder to read situations and harder to read emotions for those individuals. So I think then that like stylistically the communication method is like really important, and the signals that we send as like colleagues and leaders become really important because of the way that those individuals have to translate those signals. And so it's also, I guess it's like how people are like listening to the signals they're getting, but also it's how they express themselves in the situations. And so like, are they able to articulate exactly what is important and they want to say? So I think it's an area that hopefully will only continue to grow in importance. I think there's obviously like the neurodiversity aspect, but also I think there is like, I would say that different individuals have a different level of emotional intelligence, and some people are really strong, really aware, and like, actively listen and try and make sure that like they're bringing everyone on the journey. But equally, other people that might not necessarily be the way that they think. So it's like, again, it comes back to how can you work. No one's ever going to be the same. So it's like, how can you bring those different individuals together, and how can you figure out how to use the strengths of those individuals to make sure that you get to where you want to get to within like the team itself.
Thanks so much for expanding on that a bit, because I think for me that's something I'm going to look into a lot more, because I think that's a really interesting approach, both in terms of how I communicate and making sure that my communication can be received the right way based on who else is in the room, and knowing what are some of the things that you can do to increase that impact, but also how am I receiving things that people are saying, because they might have their own things going on that I can't really think about and then I don't really know. So thanks so much for sharing on that. That was really interesting.
Yeah, no, super happy to talk about it.
Yeah. So one of the things that was really interesting for me about what you said was a little bit about the difference between, the people that you're leading and, the people that you're kind of being led by, or your peers as well. How have you found that journey as you've kind of grown through your career, and as your department's grown, the amount of people that you're leading is growing, and the whole business is growing? How have you found emotional intelligence to help you in terms of some of those situations?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think you learn from everybody. And I think, again, it comes down to the individuals, not necessarily the roles. Obviously, different people play a different role, like your manager or your leader is like who you're looking up to. And so I think that on that side, it's like, are they setting a vision that you can align with, and like kind of like be brought on the journey with them, and like, do you trust their decision making, and do you trust that they have like the genuine interest of the like individuals as well as like the business at heart? And so I think with your manager or your leader, it's like, I think a lot around trust, and it's also around being open with them and learning from them. Like, they often have done it before and have done it with lots of other individuals. Like, I think it's been super beneficial to work with, like, the CEO has been my manager for the majority of the time that I've been at Bloomwild, and he like works with like the whole business. I guess like he manages lots of different people across the business. So again, he has like a unique perspective on different individuals. So like, I think that's like been really important, and like having that empathy with the needs and struggles or the challenges or opportunities within each area, and like having that helicopter view is like really important. On a like colleague perspective, I think you always need to like learn and be open. I think you need to have the people that you can confide in and like support you, and you support them during the like journey as you like develop. So I guess that's like in terms of the advice that you give each other, or that could be in terms of sometimes it's someone you just want to like tell everything, like you that's sometimes the place where you express your like your more emotional response. And then for like the wider comms, you might have a like different approach, because it's the right thing to do, and that's like a really important distinction. Like, I think you need your people as well, so it's like making sure you've got those people, and that also you're supporting them as well. And I think, again, it's like, I think there's also a really important piece there, which is like being open and honest with your peers when you're getting it wrong. Like, I think there's like, I think leadership isn't about keeping up with the Joneses. It's like, how do you, like, we all want to be good leaders. Like, how do we, it's important to admit, I think, as well as like when we're doing really well, is like when we're not, and when we're struggling, and when we need to like have a chat. And like, I think that's really vital to like always continue to like learn. And then I guess
That's a really good point. Sorry, just on that, how did you guys create that environment? Like, was there ever a time when it just kind of happened, or like was that something that was always happening? Like, how did you guys between your peer group, how did you create that kind of environment where you can open up like that?
I think it has to be organic, and I think it also has to be around building up like the social like network within your organization. So I guess in the grad scheme we had it, and like every company at dunnhumby we had it. I think it has to be. I don't think it would necessarily work if it was forced. I could be wrong, but I think it has to kind of evolve. So what are the situations where it does evolve? Often these situations, I find that some of the best like friendships or relationships that I've built with peers have been when things have been like tough, like in this organization and in others. Like, I think you like go through the wars together and you come out the other side stronger, and then like you've built that trust as well. So I guess I think it's like around building up that, and also like I don't think it has to be like a huge group of people that you have in that. Like, I think you could different people in the organization that you would have a different level of like confidentiality with. I think that's like I think that's like important as well. It could be for like a variety of reasons. So I guess like you might confide in some people like everything, and vice versa, whereas other people you might like you have a strong rapport with, but because of your like roles, it's maybe not the right, like you don't need to. So yeah, I think like getting out there and making sure that you take those opportunities, especially with working from home, I think it's only going to become more challenging. And if I think about the relationships that I've built at work, do I think I would have been able to build the exact same relationships had I been working from home the whole time? Like, no, I think that's like, I think they're different. So it's like, how do you, given the fact that the work environment has changed, how do you still manage to make that work as well as it can? Or how do you take the opportunities? No.
That's so interesting because I feel like we were kind of in between, because we remember the old world. Like there's a lot of people who are in between, but there's an increasing number of people who all they've ever known is kind of the remote world. So I do wonder, like, how are they going to have that same like camaraderie? How are they going to build that same community around them? Because it is, you're right, it's a very different world, but I don't know if like if that's all you've known, if it just naturally happens, and if we're kind of comparing to the old world, because I still think about it sometimes. Like I think about how much time we got to spend together. Like we go for lunch, like we do this, we do that, because we were all in the same office. But yeah, I think you're so right. And it's really interesting what you said about can it be forced? Because you're right. I don't think it should be forced. I do wonder if there's a way you can be intentional about creating an environment and creating those opportunities for people to do that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. I think it also comes down to it's like as an organization, I think it's like important to encourage people, but I also think it's like, and I've been fortunate I haven't been in this situation, but I know that friends that have, where it becomes like super competitive and someone else's success means your failure, and or vice versa. And I think like that's the wrong narrative to set in an organization. Even as a leader within your team, it's like you're not going to not be promoted because of X, Y, other person. This is around your journey. This is around your success. This is around your framework. How do you get there? Like, and I think making sure that, I think that helps to like reduce some of that, like I guess more negative energy that like, I think it's like important to be mindful of. I guess like the other point, to come back to something you said around the working from home, I guess one thing that I think maybe harder is that like often leadership, like people might not necessarily see leaders or like the top leaders in the organizations apart from like during like, you know, monthly stand-ups or like those types of meetings, whereas like before they would see them around the office, how they like communicated with other people, how they had the like individual interaction. So again, I think it's like, is there a way in which we can create that space online, or do we need to, like, how important is it for organizations?
I think that's a really great point, because when I think back over where I've had really great learning moments, it's been even just from the subtle things. So like, you know what you said earlier, because about being on screen, right? So like I can only see the, you know, from like the neck up of you and your body language, but even just seeing the full body language of someone in a situation makes a massive difference. And you're right, I've learned so much from being in some of those rooms, seeing how some of those conversations go down, see how people's interactions and body language shifts. And I do wonder, like, you know, we talk about like the metaverse and stuff like that. Is that part of how we get a bit more of that? Because how, like, I think it's going to get quite wild, where like it can literally be like a moving version of you with your body language, with everything. So is that maybe how we get some of that back?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I guess it also depends on what, on the metaverse piece. It like sometimes people want to express how they're feeling, and sometimes they might not. Like sometimes it's like kind of, and I think it depends on like, you know, maybe how introverted or extroverted you are. It maybe depends on like how you're feeling that day. Maybe on a good day you want everyone to know that you're having a great day, but like on a day when it's bad, you don't want some like metaverse version of you to like give the game away. So I guess it's like, it's an interesting like balance, and I think it like it would have to depend on how we would structure that. Like I can see there, I think there's a nugget there that's like, how do you find a way to articulate your emotional, like how you're bringing yourself to a situation, which is like really helpful. One thing that was really useful we did it in a leadership offsite during like a big thing last year, which is something that I think I find really useful. Is at the start of this day, I was like, what's the one word that sums up how you're like what you want to come away today feeling? And like it really like centered people in like where people were in their minds and like where people wanted to be. And then there was a check-in at the end, and it was like a 5-minute exercise, but like super powerful to just be like, this is how everybody's like bringing themselves to this situation. I had no idea. Now I do. Have they got to that point? And it's like something that's like so simple,
That's really
but
good.
actually it's like people have articulated it without having to express everything that they feel.
That's really, really good. I think I'm kind of torn because I feel like part of trying to be a better leader is trying to be with people and understand, even without them expressly saying like, oh, actually Mairead might not be feeling that great today, like she's usually like this is her usual body language, something feels a bit different, like let me check in with her and let me see how she's doing. So I think sometimes the things that our body give away, is what helps other people to be able to care for us, if that makes sense. And
100%, yeah.
so, and that's where I'm a bit torn about, people being able to hide that, because I think bringing our authentic selves, whether we feel good, bad, ugly, whatever it is, it helps us to bond together. Like you said, some of those tougher moments are where people really bond, So I'm a bit torn, to be honest, because I wonder what emotional intelligence looks like in the metaverse.
Yeah, and how do you, yeah, it's going to be interesting, I think. A whole new world. And again, it's like,
Whole new
yeah, a whole new world.
um, on your journey, are there any like standout moments where you could think back and say like, okay, this is where I really started to be more aware of emotional intelligence, or what's kind of been your approach to learning about it?
Yeah, I think I learned it, always learning, and never have got to the point where I feel like it's like every day I feel like you
Yeah.
learn you learn for the good and the bad. I think I had quite a like I think I had quite a useful and important lesson before I actually even joined Sky. So between uni and joining Sky that summer, I had an opportunity to work in a hospital for a few weeks. So before that, I'd worked in a hospital as like a ward housekeeper for like 5 years, and every day I would go in and I'd be so frustrated about how the processes weren't what they should be. They were inefficient, and like there were like a lot of wastage. Like there's no way for one shift to tell the other shift like to hand over. It was like, so I was like, oh, we can just fix this. And so I wrote to the like head of the hospital contract, and I was like, hey, I'd love a job for the summer, and he gave me a job. Anyway, long story short, like I initiated a few different ways of working changes. The leadership were super supportive of it, and it was great. The big lesson during that, what I learned was, for me, it was very black and white. It's like, this is broken, we should fix it across these different things.
Yeah.
And that obviously, like, people have done that job for 20 years, and I was very like, we're just going to implement these things, and so that some of the stuff went through, some of it didn't. But like the thing that was like super, like the big takeaway for me was like, you need to bring people on a journey with you through anything. And it's like, how do you better understand where they're coming from? Like, how do you understand that they've been in that job for 20 years? How do they understand that this thing is important? How do you understand that this person doesn't like this person? So if that person suggests it, all these things. So it was like really a huge, sharp lesson in like to take away on like change management. And I guess as like a 20-year-old, I was super naive because I was like, well, that's not like, this will be better. And so
Yeah.
that was a huge that was a first, I guess that was a big lesson for me. Yeah, and like I think like building the team from scratch at Bloom, like the BI team at Bloomwald from scratch has been another great lesson. Again, like learning iteratively. I think part of that is also we acquired, as I mentioned earlier, like some companies in Europe. So again, like how do you bring emotional intelligence to that situation where you're a completely different organization who've acquired another organization and you all need to work together? So like loads of like really useful learnings throughout that whole process as well.
And I think there's such a big difference as well between, when it's just an English company, for example, and acquiring an English company, there's already company culture there. But then when you're talking about like, an English company with an Italian company or the French company, there's also the cultural angle as well in terms of like country culture. So how have you guys been able to do that so successfully?
Totally, I think that's a really good point. I think actually one thing that's probably helped here is being like we're hybrid, like most organizations, but actually previously before we acquired those companies, it was before lockdown, and we didn't we didn't really have that many, like, I wouldn't say phone call meetings because everyone was in the office. But all of a sudden COVID happens and everybody's online the whole time. And then you start working with other people online. So it's like I'm chatting to, I could be chatting to someone in, I don't know, Brixton, but I also could be chatting to someone in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. So I think on that side, it's kind of helped in some ways. I think face-to-face contact as well has been like really important to build in those relationships. So like jumping on the Eurostar and like going over to like meet the team and to like spend some time together. And again, to like, I think that's really helped to foster that like strong bond between different people, because it's like, oh, I'm me, you're you, let's go and like, chat. Like it's much easier than when you're just like behind a wall, you've never met each other in person, you don't know what each other's intentions are, you don't know, like, so I think that's been a really I think face-to-face contact, I think it's like a huge thing. I'm like really strong believer in it.
Definitely. I think, they say the camera adds £10 or something like that, right? They say like now the camera like sucks out so much of your energy, like it drops your energy by so much because you can't see some of the nuance. So like it's really interesting like how we are learning how to adapt that. So even for stuff like podcasts, they're like you have to up your energy to the point where you feel like I'm being too much. And then actually when you watch it back, you're like, that's actually the normal version of me. So it's really, really interesting.
That's so interesting. And I think even talking about the like video camera, I think that's another interesting one. Like, for example, if you're a leader of like a team meeting, so you might be able to like, you'll be like presenting slides and the team will be there. And some of the like, it's been so great like to have a like strong rapport with my team, because they'll pick up on like triggers, like they'll pick up on each other's like where they've brought to the table, and they'll like message, be like, hey, like, this person seems like this, but like as the leader, if you're like focusing on the thing you're trying to articulate, it's like that then like means that you don't necessarily have the same ability to pick up. So it's like, how do you make sure that everybody is kind of working together to like make sure everyone's okay, I guess, in some senses.
100%. And I think that comes back to something you said earlier about making sure that you build the right team around you. Because like I said, like as a leader, you're not always going to be able to see everything, and you can't spend all the time with everybody to also know what makes each person tick, what triggers each person. So it's great that you have an extension of yourself within the team who are able to do that, and they all know where everyone's intention is coming from. I really liked what you said about knowing people's intentions. I think that's so important for understanding.
Yeah, totally. And I think even with your the leaders that you hire, when you hire leaders, the aim should be that they'll get to the point where they can take your job. And then that's when you've been a good leader. That's the sign of like, to me, that's a sign of success. So how do you make sure that you create a space for them that they feel trusted and empowered? And also, again, like how are they bringing themselves? How are they making sure that they're actively listening to like the teams that we're working with, that they're like in touch with like their team, and that they can control their emotions when they need to. I think all that is like essential, and like making sure you find those people is crucial.
How have you been able to hire for EQ, if that makes sense? Like it's quite easy in analytics to like figure out, okay, can they code, can they not? How do you hire for EQ?
Yeah, and again, I think this comes down to, I think it's also important to again recognize like neurodiversity within this as well. So like I think there are active decisions that you need to make. Like ideally, like you want people to be able to be put in a situation and be able to empathize with like the stakeholders that they're going to work with and things like that. So I think it's I always think it's really interesting. You try and like answer through the, like, for example, the first stage, which is the interview stage. And my favorite question is always like, when have you made a mistake? And like, how have you like, tell me about a time you've made a mistake. It is so telling of like who you're speaking to. It like
Yeah.
tells you so much, because I'm not interested in someone trying to like shoehorn like that they've never made a mistake, because we've all made mistakes, right?
We've all
Like
made mistakes, yeah.
we've all made so many mistakes. Obviously it's an interview, so you can't obviously you're not going to be like super dramatic, but like it's a really important like piece to understand like how someone brings themselves, like what they've learned, how they're able to like express themselves. So I think the interview process, I think it's like how you like who they meet during the process, and I think often you get an impression of it really early by like the questions that they ask and like what they care about with the role. And I think some of it is like everyone's going to have a different level of EQ, and it really depends on what the role is and how stakeholder facing it is. Like I don't think you need like 12 perfect like examples. It's because I think a lot of it will come through in like your ongoing interactions, but like I think it's important to like think about it during the process. And like I think it's an important trade-off decision. Like it's like if someone is really strong in this area but might not necessarily have the same coding skills, like where do you make that trade-off based on that? And like it's not just about the technical, because someone can go into a dark room and build the perfect dashboard, but if they're never able to like communicate or to learn or to work with stakeholders to make through the right thing, then it's never going to be used by the business. And ultimately as a team we should be measured on our impact. Yeah, exactly. Like so I think it's a really long-winded answer, but I think it comes through the interview process. I think it comes through like how people express themselves, and I also think it comes through very quickly through like any scenarios that you ask them. And like as people like come into the business, even if they might not necessarily have like the best like the strongest EQ, I think it's also been really transparent and clear. Like, it comes back to like, radical candor. Like, are you able to like give them like direct feedback that like is empathetic, but also make sure that they are clear on what is expected of them in their role. And as a leader, I think it's our duty to make sure that we set those expectations for people to give them that like clarity to hopefully make them succeed.
No, that makes sense. I'm going to ask you your favorite question, as you just said. So what's like an EQ mistake that you've made, and what did you learn from
it? What's an EQ mistake that I have made? One, actually, I'll name one from about a few years ago that mortifies me to this day. But maybe I think it was the first 6 months of Blue and Wild. With working with my boss on a project. So I think app conversion was down, and we just launched the app, and there's a lot of pressure to make sure that it was right. And my boss was like really digging into me on the analysis. He was doing his job. He was like, why is this down and how can we fix it? And I think at the time I was like, I probably didn't bring the right I didn't bring the right attitude to the situation. And so I remember, and I think about this still, I'm mortified. I rolled my eyes at him. And I now just like,
wow.
Honestly, I was like so passionate about what we were doing. I also was like a bit like hot-headed about the situation because I was like frustrated. And so I wasn't able to like take a step back, catch a breath, and come at it and express myself properly. And so it was like, and I think he maybe called me out on it after.
I was gonna say, did he notice? Like, did you
I think he did. Yeah, I think he did. If I'm just trying to remember, I think he did. I think he called me out on it at some point. And actually, like, again, I think it was like after the fact. And I think like, again, it's like, that's the thing I really appreciate with him. He's always been really open with me and like kind of set boundaries and like said, and like obviously how did I do that? But like I think at the time it was just like that instant reaction, and I was like, so like I think what I've learned from that is, even in the situations, and again, we don't always get it right, but even in the situations where like where you have an instant reaction, is just like taking that step back to be like, where is someone else coming from, and like where are they coming from, and what are they trying to achieve, and like how does that meet what you're trying to do? And like often it won't be as like, you'll be like, why? It won't be as like stressful when you think about it, because you're like, oh, that's why they care. And I think it just really helps you. So like, I've thankfully never done it since, and hopefully we'll never do it again. But it was a super important lesson that stayed with me. How about you? Has anyone else asked you this question?
Oh, that is a great question, actually. People normally don't ask me questions, so now I have to think. I think for me, it's probably because I'm generally quite like level all the time, and I think that's part of my personality, and I've tried to work on that. But I think sometimes where I think I make mistakes is on the initial like receipt of things and judgment, and sometimes that can then lead to responding in a certain way, or almost like cross-examining someone when they don't really need to be, if that makes sense. So like taking something, I'm trying to think of a specific example. I think when I first started managing, there was someone who was quite difficult, let's say, and we got into a bit of back and forth about things, and I just remember like feeling like I was so hot about that whole situation, and then hearing some of the things that they thought that I said and this and that, and I was like, I need to get better at how I communicate those things, because now I've almost like prejudged them based on how they're approaching it. When actually, if I was probably a little bit more open, a little bit more understanding, really just trying to understand as opposed to having to defend myself, I think it could have gone slightly differently, because then when they're playing back the stuff that I'm saying, I'm like, okay, I can understand how you got to that, but that's really not what I'm trying to say. But that's my responsibility in terms of how do I communicate so clearly that like there's no room for misinterpretation as much as possible. I know it's impossible, but that's still the responsibility that I can take. So I think for me, it was really that thing of taking that step back and being able to really, like, judgment free, be like, okay, you're saying these things, they sound this way, but why are you saying them? You know, and then maybe I can get past the fact that you're saying it and really get to the underneath, and that's what we can solve together. And I think I wasn't very good at that for a bit of time in that situation. That was really bad.
I can relate to that one for sure. I think it's to your point, like it can never be perfect, but then like how can like, is there like, what are the things that we can do to help in that situation? Like what are the forums, or how do we communicate, or like how do we follow up to make sure that the information is right? And I don't think anyone gets this completely right, by the way, but I think it's like even the fact that you're aware of it is like so important for like emotional intelligence. The fact that you can you can take that zone out and like take a step back on it of like actually. So it's a learning rather than feel like a mistake.
100%. And that's what mistakes are for, right? Is that whole thing of like fail fast, like try things out. If they don't work, take stock of it, do something different. And I'm really working on the more like ask more questions as opposed to make statements, if that makes sense. So I think if someone says something that's a bit like, that's a bit odd, like try and ask them questions before I give my statement back. And that's been really helpful in terms of talking a bit less and asking more. That's really helped, I think, for me.
We did some really interesting training at work, which was around it was about feedback, and it was they put us in like a role play, and you had to do like a review with someone, and you weren't allowed to give an opinion. You had to like ask questions, and it was so like everyone's just like, I'm dying to give advice as a leader. I'm dying to tell you, like, and it's like really having to balance that, like, how do you help someone get? It's a different thing to what you're trying to solve here, right? You're trying to make sure you understand all the context before you give an opinion. But I also think it's important, even as a leader, with like, how do you let your like team members or people you work with like figure out the answer for themselves without you telling them what the answer is? And like often people want to get to the answer themselves anyway. So it's like, how do you do that?
Those things could both be linked, though. It could both be linked, like in me not trying to solve it and me not trying to give my opinion. they could also figure it out for themselves. And it's such a fine balance, because there are certain situations where like actually this is by the book what needs to happen, but in the general day to day, like people are really capable, especially if you've done a good job of recruiting. They're very capable of figuring the stuff out for themselves. So we do just have to like create the space, get out of the way a little bit, and just like be a bit more quiet. It's really hard.
Totally, but that again, that's a sign of a successful team. Like if your team are then able to do, like if your team are able to take on that situation the next time without you even being involved, like that's when you know you've done the right thing. Like, you know, and again, I think being a good leader means that you don't have to take the credit for. I think it's exceptional. It's like vital that you don't take the credit, or you're like the one man band. It's like how are you making sure that there is that space, and like setting the framework and letting people like work within a framework, or like let people like, you know, create that space that it's not just like, oh, this all singing, all dancing leader of the team. Like, no, absolutely, it should not be. It should be like we're better as like all the different individuals, like who all have like their own voice and own space. So it's like just trying to make sure you create that environment, which again, I think you're right. I think some of that comes down to like bringing in team members who have like stronger EQ, and I think it's like good hiring, and like all of those things like play a big part in it, to make sure you can get there.
Because I think it comes back to that thing you said earlier about, you know, making sure that people can do your job, if that makes sense. So like Wayne once said to me, like when I first started working with him, he said, your job is to make yourself redundant, so that you know, if you're not here, your team can function without you. And it's such like a scary thought, because you're like, well, then what am I going to do? And he was like, but that means that I can promote you, I can give you more responsibility, I can give you various things, because everything else still runs. And I think it is that thing of like, how do we build teams, like you said, that everybody is better together. You don't necessarily need that one leader there to make it all work.
Totally. My boss always, he said this similar thing to me a few years ago. He was like, you know, you don't need to do every single thing. Like, you know, your role should be that your team should, you know, like step up as well. And it's like, he calls it, I don't know if you've heard it, it's like the net multiplier effect. It's like, are you able to, are you able to bring your leaders on the journey, and then they're strong leaders, and then their team are strong, so everybody is really strong, rather than it like just being I'm strong and I like keep all these secrets in my like treasure chest, and like, you know, anyone has to come through me to do something. And if you can achieve that, like again, you say it, and I guess that's like what's happened at Blue and Wild. Like everybody has stepped up because like we've been able to like bring strong people to like do more things and like to grow more areas. And it's like, I think that's been like a super important, and it's a mindset shift, because I was like, I'll feel like a failure if everyone's doing everything and I'm doing nothing. What am I going to do with my time? And rest assured, I've never been without things to do. So like, you know, I think it's like, oh, then you can get more involved in like the overall conversations, or taking a step back. So yeah, I think it's like super important.
100% agree. 100% agree. Thank you so much for your time. Today it's been really, really useful, really interesting conversation. And just as we close, is there any like final thought that you want to share?
No, I guess like I'm a big believer in you learn by doing, and I think even the fact of people that are listening to this podcast shows that they are trying to be more aware of like emotional intelligence, which I think is like the first step. But I'm always a believer if like just try things and be aware of it, and like you'll get there.
Amen to that. Thank you so much. I'm super happy with you, super proud of you. You're awesome. Thanks for joining.
You too. Cheers.
And thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.
Bye.